Satellite.
Oh, okay.
When we come back, we'll have author Edie Dickenson joining us by telephone. She fell in love with racing and traveled track to track, talking to some of the greatest announcers in the business. We'll be right back.
Furlong grounds between horses. Tandoori Ma. Now here comes Moonlit Road charging at 15-1. Moonlit Road and Brandon Meyer. Moonlit Road charging home against the odds.
They're in the final furlong. It's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Do. Who won by a half a dozen lengths?
The voices we equate with some of the greatest moments in racing history, the great track announcers around the country, caught up with by Edie Dickenson, who fell in love with racing at a kind of a midpoint in her life.
Think about watching back those races or sporting events in general without a track announcer, without an announcer, and it really loses its excitement when watching those back. And just think about that. And Edie Dickenson joins us, as Carolyn mentioned, here on Race Day to discuss the encounters that she has had with different track announcers, and they've been talked about now in a book. Edie, welcome to Race Day America. Scott Hazelton alongside Carolyn Conley.
Thanks, Scott and Carolyn, for having me on Race Day America.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. You are the quintessential horse racing fan. Tell us originally how you fell in love with the sport and how that progressed to a book.
Well, I had always followed, Carolyn, the Triple Crown races. But in 2003, I went to the Breeders' Cup at the Great Race Place and got hooked. And I ended up reading over 100 books on horse racing, but there were only a couple about the track announcers, and I decided it was time they got their overdue recognition.
We showed back Trevor Denman, John Dooley, and Tom Durkin, very recognizable voices to our HRTV viewers and fans in racing in general. But who are some of the other individuals that you encountered for this book? I
started with Kurt Becker, and he was a wonderful one to begin with. He gave me probably about 3 hours on one of his off days at Keeneland. And from there, I went to Turf Paradise, where I interviewed the late Luke Kreitbos. I also interviewed Dave Johnson, Robert Geller, Terry Wallace, Dave Rodman, Larry Colmus, John Dooley, 11 of them.
Wow, and such an endeavor took you all around the country. And, of course, the one thing these men have in common is the fact that they call horse racing on a daily basis. But was there another defining characteristic that perhaps these track announcers held in common?
And I skipped Michael Rona, too. I saw him when I timed it so I could see Lost in the Fog. These 11 men, Carolyn, have such passion for horse racing, and what I thought was interesting was how all of their pressure is inner. It's on themselves. They are perfectionists, and so very seldom do they leave a racetrack thinking that they did a perfect job. The other thing that I think they are very impressive with is how accessible they are. You just call the racetrack and ask for the track announcer's booth, and they answer it themselves, which was wonderful for me. And they were very, very gracious and generous with their time and their memories.
You know, one of the other things, too, is that amazes me is their ability to maintain, memory of these horses in such a quick time and memorize the horses, their names, along with saddlecloths and silks. And Luke Kreitbos, as you mentioned there, the late Luke Kreitbos, I've seen some pictures of him, and his ability to do so was through using Crayola crayons to help him. What are some of the other interesting things that you saw these gentlemen use to try to memorize horses' names?
That's a great question, Scott. A lot of them is just repetition. They need those 10 minutes during the post parade, and they say the names over and over and over and use tricks like that. Some of them, I think Robert Geller pretty much has, what do you call it, memory, you know, where it's
photographic memory.
Thank you. Yes, and so some of them have that, like Larry Comas, too. He can be talking to you and glance at the horses, and he has it down pat.
It's incredible. I mean, it's a gift on many levels, I'm sure. Edie, tell us a little bit about your travels to reach all these track announcers, to go to the different venues where they were located. Were you able to combine that with some opportunities to take in the racing and then perhaps sightsee nearby?
Always, yes. I timed it that way. When I talked to Terry Wallace, I timed it for the Rebel. And like I mentioned with Michael Rona, I was so lucky to see Lost in the Fog. Tom Durkin, I visited him at Saratoga, which I fell in love with it. Although I will say that your racetrack there at Santa Anita is still my favorite. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky to see Trevor. The last time I saw him was right after he called the Breeders' No, I saw him in January, but I also saw him right after he called the Breeders' Cup with Zenyatta. And he was still so pumped the day after that, and he was excited about Goldakova's race, too.
Well, that's a call we'll never forget.
Absolutely not, and he made note of that as well. Edie, you know, when we deal in different professions, there's always somebody typically that we look up to in particular instances. Was there one common name or one common thread that these men shared as to have looked up to different track announcers in the past?
Well, they mentioned, some of the older ones. You know, Dave Johnson talks in the book about Capicella. And then Luke Kreitbos told me, he was the second one I interviewed, and he said, Edie, if you do not get Durkin and Denman, forget the book.
Yeah, Luke was just a big bear, such a lovable guy, and Tom Durkin with a style all his own. Is how would you describe his personality, Edie?
He's bigger than life, I think, and he was they all were accessible, but he got out his Mayor Daley book with all the phrases in it and showed it to me. I mean, his preparation is unbelievable, Carolyn. He also has report cards that he does for every single race. And so, you know, and then he was also kind of fun in that when I was talking to him at the beginning, I was nervous because, my gosh, it's Tom Durkin, you know. And so I'm coming up with my questions, and in between each question, he would kind of drum his fingers, you know. So I was, okay. But they were all wonderful, and then they've all agreed to sign copies of the books, which I think the fans would love having a copy signed by their track announcer.
Undoubtedly, Edie, and the first portion of that is acquiring that book in order to get those signatures. How can fans out there acquire this book?
It can be bought on McFarland is the publisher, and so you can go on McFarlandPub.com, but it is also at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, quite a few bookstores, and it's also on eBooks and Kindle. And there are over 40 pictures in the book, and of course, since I'm so into the horses, there's a picture of Rachel Alexandra and Zenyatta.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to picking this up, and I hope you do some signings at racetracks around the country, some book signings. I'm sure the fans would enjoy that.
That would be fun.
Well, Edie, thanks so much. We appreciate your time today, and best of luck with They Call the Horses.
Thank you. It was lots of fun.
Nice to have you with us.
Thanks.
All right, that's Edie Dickenson, author of a brand new book, They Call the Horses. She's a retired school teacher, taught school for many years, raised her son and daughter by herself virtually, her husband dying in a plane crash when they were very young. And now she's taken her passion to a greater height.
Secretariat had a pretty memorable track
didn't he?
call for him in the Belmont. Remember
we'll
that
talk all about the movie when we come back on Race Day.